Long before most soldiers ever worried about ambushes or sniper fire, they learned something else about Vietnam. They learned that safety was an illusion, even inside what was supposed to be a secure U.S. firebase. Firebases were meant to be places where men could finally breathe. Raised earthworks, sandbag walls, cleared ground, concertina wire, guard towers watching the jungle instead of being swallowed by it. After days or weeks of patrols, these places felt like relief. You could sit down. You could take your boots off. You could sleep without moving every few minutes. That sense of safety never lasted. The creatures didn't wait outside the perimeter. They were already inside. Most men noticed it slowly. At first, it was small things. Something moving when it shouldn't. A boot that felt heavier than usual. A strange tapping sound against metal at night. Nobody talked much about it at first. Everyone assumed it was just nerves. The jungle did that to you. Made you jumpy. Made you imagine things. Then the bites started. The first time it happened to someone nearby, nobody understood what they were seeing. A man reaches for his boot, then jerks backward hard enough to fall. He doesn't yell at first. He gasps. His whole body locks up like something shorted out inside him. When he finally makes a sound, it doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like shock. The boot comes off fast. Too fast. Something long and thick drops out and starts moving across the dirt. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It moves like it owns the place. That's when everyone understands. Firebases created perfect hiding places. Sandbags stacked in shade. Wooden hooches with damp floors. Ammo crates left open overnight. Boots lined up outside sleeping areas to dry. Helmets set upside down. Radios, cables, ration boxes, ponchos, all of it left still for hours at a time. Stillness meant shelter. The creatures learned that quickly. Some of the worst ones were fast. Too fast for comfort. Long bodies, too many legs, moving like they were poured across the ground instead of crawling. They didn't run away when discovered. They struck when touched. Defensive, aggressive, immediate. Inside a firebase, these creatures didn't have to hunt. Soldiers brought everything they needed. Warmth, moisture, darkness, food scraps, places to hide. The perimeter kept enemy soldiers out. It didn't keep nature out. The most common mistake was boots. Men were exhausted, feet soaked for days. When you finally stopped, all you wanted was air on your skin. Boots came off. Socks came off. Boots got left outside or under a cot. That space inside a boot stayed warm long after the foot left it. The next morning, someone rushed. Maybe incoming rounds. Maybe a patrol stepping off early. No time to think. No time to shake things out properly. A foot slides in, and then everything goes wrong at once. The pain wasn't like a cut. It wasn't like a burn. It was instant and overwhelming, like something sharp driven deep and twisted. Legs buckled. Hands lost grip. Men dropped where they stood. Some couldn't speak at all for several seconds. Muscles seized up like they were no longer taking orders. Medics learned to recognize it quickly. Not from paperwork. From the way a man reacted. From the look in his eyes. From how his body locked against itself. Inside a firebase, that kind of injury was more than pain. It disrupted everything. A man who couldn't walk meant someone else carried his gear. A man who couldn't use his hand couldn't clean his weapon, couldn't pull security properly, couldn't climb in and out of positions easily. It changed routines. It slowed movements. It created tension. And it happened when nobody expected it. Sleeping areas weren't safe either. Men slept on cots, on the ground, on plywood, wherever there was space. Sleeping bags stayed open during the day to dry out. That warmth drew things in. Some men woke up already bitten. Others woke up when it happened. The body reacts before the mind does. A sudden jolt. A sharp intake of breath. Then pain spreading fast. Not just where the bite happened, but outward. Thighs, shoulders, arms, wherever skin pressed against fabric or wood or earth. Men tore open sleeping bags, rolled out onto the ground. Some thrashed without realizing it. Others froze, afraid that moving would make it worse. Nobody slept deeply after seeing that once. Sandbags were another problem. They were everywhere. Walls, bunkers, fighting positions. They held moisture. They stayed cool inside. Perfect places to hide. Leaning back against a sandbag felt normal. Comfortable, even. Until it wasn't. More than one man collapsed thinking he'd been shot, only for everyone to realize the pain came from something smaller and faster. By the time someone thought to look, the creature was already gone, slipping back into the dark spaces between the bags. Firebases were supposed to be predictable. Routines mattered. Guard shifts, meal times, maintenance, rest. These incidents broke that rhythm. After a few weeks, men changed how they lived. Boots got shaken violently, sometimes thrown against walls before being worn. Helmets were checked every time. Sleeping bags were turned inside out daily. Some men refused to leave gear on the ground at all. Everything hung, even if it made no sense. But no matter how careful you were, the feeling stayed. That feeling that something could still get you while you rested. The creatures didn't care about schedules. They didn't care about rank or experience. New arrivals got bitten. Old hands got bitten. Officers, enlisted. It didn't matter. That made it worse. You couldn't outlearn it. Some men tried to laugh it off. Jokes got made. Names got invented. Gallows humor, the kind that keeps you from thinking too hard. But nobody really relaxed. Not fully. Night was the worst. Firebases were quieter at night. Radios low. Engines off. Just the sound of insects and distant jungle noise. That's when men noticed every small sensation. Something brushing skin. A shift in fabric. A crawling feeling that might have been nothing. Flashlights clicked on constantly. Not for enemy movement. For personal checks. For reassurance. Men learned to sit very still and wait when they felt something move, afraid that reacting too fast would make it bite. Some creatures struck once and disappeared. Others clung. Those were worse. Removing them made the pain spike again. Swelling came fast. Limbs stiffened. Skin tightened. Medics did what they could, but inside a firebase, resources were limited. Painkillers helped some. Others just waited it out. Hours of throbbing. Waves of heat. Muscles refusing to relax. And all of this happened without a single enemy round fired. That was the part that stayed with men. You could do everything right. Follow procedure. Stay inside the wire. And still end up on the ground, helpless, because of something hiding where you tried to rest. Firebases were not sanctuaries. They were compromises. Clearings carved out of a living environment that never stopped pushing back. By the time most soldiers accepted that, it was already too late. The wire kept enemies out. But the deadliest things inside the firebase didn't need permission to enter. After the first few incidents, nobody pretended anymore. Whatever lived inside the firebase wasn't accidental. It wasn't rare. It was part of the place. Men stopped talking about if it would happen again. The question became when. The creatures didn't limit themselves to sleeping areas. Anywhere that stayed still long enough became a hiding place. Ammo crates stacked near bunkers. Radio rooms with cables running along damp floors. Latrine pits dug into soft ground. Generator sheds that stayed warm day and night. Even medical tents weren't spared. One of the worst realizations came when a man reached into an ammo crate during resupply. He was focused on counting, doing his job, thinking about nothing else. When he pulled his hand back, it didn't come out empty. Something was attached to it. He dropped to his knees instantly. His fingers locked around nothing. His arm shook uncontrollably. The crate tipped over, spilling rounds into the dirt, but nobody cared. Everyone was focused on his hand, swelling before their eyes, veins standing out like cords. That crate had been sitting untouched for hours. That meant the creature had been there the whole time. Radio operators started checking every pouch before reaching inside. Batteries, handsets, wire coils, anything that stayed dark and still became suspect. Some men refused to reach blindly into anything ever again. They used sticks, flashlights, anything to avoid skin contact. This slowed everything down. Firebases relied on efficiency. Radios had to be ready. Ammo had to be accessible. Equipment had to be where it was expected. Every extra second spent checking meant something else was delayed. But nobody argued anymore. Not after seeing what happened when you didn't check. Latrines became another problem. They were necessary, but nobody liked them even before this started. The smell, the flies, the exposed ground. After the bites began, they became places men avoided as long as possible. More than one soldier learned the hard way that the wooden frames and surrounding dirt made perfect cover. Sitting down without looking could end painfully. Standing too close could do the same. Some men used flashlights every time, even in daylight. Others refused to go alone. It wasn't fear of embarrassment. It was fear of being caught off guard. Even the medical areas weren't safe. Stretchers leaned against walls. Supplies stored under tables. Cots raised just enough off the ground to leave space beneath them. One medic reached under a cot to retrieve a dropped item and pulled his hand back so fast he hit his elbow on the frame. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The people treating injuries were just as vulnerable. As incidents increased, routines changed again. Some units started daily inspections, not because command ordered them, but because men demanded them. Sandbags got pulled apart occasionally. Gear got aired out more often. Anything that stayed untouched for too long became a risk. But the creatures adapted better than the men did. They didn't rely on one spot. They moved. They followed warmth. They followed moisture. They followed stillness. Night shifts became harder. Guard towers were elevated, but access ladders and platforms still collected moisture. Men sitting still for hours felt things brush against boots or ankles. Sometimes it was nothing. Sometimes it wasn't. Nobody wanted to abandon a post over something that might not even be there. But nobody wanted to ignore it either. That tension wore men down. Sleep got lighter, shorter, fragmented, even inside bunkers. Men woke up multiple times a night, convinced something had moved. Flashlights clicked on and off constantly. Some men slept fully dressed, boots included, despite how uncomfortable it was. Better sore than bitten? The bites themselves seemed worse over time. Or maybe men just noticed them more. Swelling lingered longer. Numbness stayed after the pain faded. Some men complained their fingers didn't feel right for weeks. Others limped long after the bite healed. Medics kept notes, but there was no real solution. You couldn't remove the environment. You couldn't seal a firebase completely. You couldn't spray everything constantly. Supplies were limited, and priorities stayed focused on combat readiness. Evacuation wasn't guaranteed. A man bitten badly enough to collapse might still be expected to remain on base if he could stand. The pain didn't always show on the outside. Swelling didn't always look dramatic, but the man felt it with every movement. That created resentment, not toward leadership, toward the place itself. Men started talking about the firebase like it was alive, like it was watching, like it chose moments to remind them who really controlled the ground. That kind of thinking wasn't logical, but it made sense after weeks of this. Morale slipped in small ways. Jokes turned darker. Complaints got quieter. Nobody expected comfort anymore. Men stopped hoping for it. Work details became riskier. Clearing debris meant disturbing hiding spots. Repairing sandbags meant exposing hands. Digging new positions meant dealing with whatever already lived there. Some men volunteered less, not out of laziness, out of calculation. Every task had a cost now. The creatures didn't just hurt bodies. They changed behavior. One man refused to sleep inside after being bitten twice in the same week. He set up a hammock outside the main hoche area, higher off the ground. It didn't really make sense. Everyone knew the creatures could climb, but it gave him peace of mind. Others followed. Soon there were hammocks everywhere, strewn between poles, trees, anything sturdy enough. It looked improvised, almost desperate, but nobody mocked it. Everyone understood. The base started looking less organized, less controlled, like the jungle was slowly reclaiming it. Command noticed, but didn't push back hard. They lived there too. The psychological effect spread beyond the bites themselves. Men became hyper-aware of their own skin. A drop of sweat felt like movement. A loose thread felt like crawling. Some men slapped at their arms constantly without realizing it. This made nerves fray faster. Arguments broke out over small things. Sleep deprivation added up. Anxiety stayed just under the surface. The creatures never appeared in large numbers at once. They didn't swarm. They didn't announce themselves. That made them worse. Every encounter felt personal, not an attack. An intrusion. Something crossing a boundary that shouldn't have been crossed. Firebases were meant to be controlled environments. Predictable. Familiar. The bites proved they weren't. Men started counting days differently. Not by patrols completed or missions finished, but by how long it had been since the last incident. A few quiet nights felt suspicious, like something was overdue. Then it would happen again. A shout in the dark. A man stumbling. A flashlight beam swinging wildly. Someone swearing through clenched teeth while trying not to move. The rest of the base would listen in silence, knowing exactly what was happening without seeing it. No gunfire, no alarms, just pain. By the time someone new arrived at the firebase, the veterans didn't scare them on purpose. They didn't need to. The place did it on its own. Within days, the new men learned the rules. Shake everything. Trust nothing. Never assume rest is safe. Firebases were still better than the jungle beyond the wire. Everyone knew that. But they were no longer places of relief. They were places where you learned that danger didn't need permission to cross a line. And that realization followed men everywhere they went. By the time most men reached the last stretch of their tour, the creatures inside the firebase no longer surprised them. That didn't mean the fear was gone. It meant the fear had settled in and become part of daily life. Men stopped reacting loudly. No shouting, no scrambling. When it happened, they clenched their teeth and dealt with it. Pain was expected now. Shock was expected. The idea that rest could be interrupted at any moment felt normal. That was the most dangerous change of all. When something becomes normal, it stops standing out. It stops being processed as an emergency. It becomes background noise. And in Vietnam, background noise was how people broke. The creatures didn't just bite skin. They rewired habits. Men stopped trusting stillness. Sitting too long felt wrong. Lying still felt worse. Even when exhausted, even when eyes closed, the body stayed alert. Muscles stayed tight. Sleep came in short bursts, never deep enough to fully let go. Some men couldn't remember the last time they'd slept through the night without waking up at least once to check their gear, their boots, their surroundings. Others stopped trying. They accepted that real sleep would come later, somewhere else, some other time. If it ever did. Over time, the bites themselves mattered less than the anticipation, the waiting, the knowledge that something could happen without warning, without sound, without giving you time to react. That sense followed men, even when nothing happened. Quiet nights were the worst. When the base settled into silence, when the jungle noise blended into a steady hum, That's when thoughts crept in. That's when men imagined movement that wasn't there. Or maybe was. Flashlights clicked on for no reason. Men shifted positions repeatedly. Some sat up for hours, leaning against walls they no longer trusted, afraid that lying down would invite another surprise. The firebase was still safer than the jungle outside the wire. Everyone knew that. But safety was relative now. It wasn't a guarantee. It was a fragile arrangement that could fail at any moment. That realization changed how men thought about the war. Combat made sense, in a way. You trained for it. You prepared. You expected it. There were rules, even if they were brutal. The creatures inside the firebase didn't follow any of those rules. They didn't care about strategy. They didn't respond to force. They didn't retreat when challenged. They simply existed. That made them harder to accept. Some men said later that this was when Vietnam stopped feeling like a mission and started feeling like a test of endurance. Not just physical, but mental. How long could you stay alert without burning out? How long could you live without real rest? The answer was different for everyone. By the end of their tours, many men carried small changes they didn't notice at the time. Checking boots became automatic. Shaking out clothes felt necessary. Touching the ground with bare skin felt wrong. These habits didn't turn off when the war ended. Back home, years later, men still checked shoes before putting them on, still shook blankets before getting into bed, still reacted instantly to crawling sensations that weren't really there. Some laughed about it. Others didn't talk about it at all. The creatures had done their work quietly. They never killed many men. They didn't leave dramatic stories behind. There were no medals tied to surviving them. No official recognition. But they took something just as important. They took rest. They took trust. They took the idea that there was ever a truly safe place. Veterans sometimes struggled to explain this part of Vietnam to people who hadn't been there. It sounded small. It sounded trivial. Bugs. Bites. Discomfort. That didn't compare to gunfire or explosions. But it wasn't about comparison. It was about accumulation. Day after day, night after night, the environment pressed in, the jungle outside, the creatures inside. The heat, the humidity, the constant awareness that the ground itself was hostile. The creatures inside the firebase were proof that the war didn't stop at the perimeter. The wire kept enemy soldiers out, but it couldn't keep Vietnam out. The land always found a way in. Some men remembered specific incidents clearly, even decades later. The exact spot where it happened, the exact moment, the smell of the air, the feel of the ground beneath them as they tried not to move. Others remembered only the feeling, the tension, the constant low-level anxiety that never fully went away. Both memories were real. When veterans gathered years later, these stories came out quietly, usually after the expected ones had been told. After the firefights, after the patrols, after the big moments. Someone would mention checking boots. Someone else would nod. Then another would add something about sleeping lightly, about never trusting sandbags, about waking up convinced something was crawling across their skin. That's when they realized it wasn't just them. The creatures were a shared experience, one that didn't need explanation. They were part of the price of being there. The war asked a lot of men: courage, endurance, discipline. But it also asked them to live inside a place that didn't care whether they succeeded or failed. The jungle didn't choose sides. It simply reacted. Inside U.S. fire bases, where men expected relief, that truth became impossible to ignore. The same environment that hid enemies also hid things far smaller, but just as disruptive. Things that waited patiently for stillness. In the end, that may be why these memories lasted. Not because the creatures were the most dangerous threat in Vietnam, but because they violated something fundamental. The belief that rest was earned, that safety was real, that the body could relax when the mind finally allowed it. Vietnam taught men otherwise. It taught them that danger could exist without intent, without malice, without reason. It taught them that sometimes survival wasn't about fighting back, but about enduring what couldn't be controlled. And for many who served, the creatures inside the firebases were the clearest reminder of that lesson. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't need to. They were already there,